In 2022, on the day before Russia invaded Ukraine, Aleksander Chernousov left Russia for Oregon. It turns out that this path, from Russia or other Russian-speaking countries to Oregon, is well worn. Russian appears to be the fourth most spoken language in Oregon and in Multnomah County. And this was what motivated Alex's trip. He was headed here to study Russian-speaking communities in the Pacific Northwest through the University of Oregon. Aleks didn't know then that Russia would invade Ukraine the day after his departure, or that Oregon would become his long-term home. He didn't know that both what he was headed here to research and the language he was planning to research it in would quickly become much more vexed and complicated than he had assumed. Since getting here, Aleks has talked to hundreds of people from Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, Kazakhstan, and other Russian-speaking countries about their departures, their reasons for coming here, and especially their experiences in this part of the world. From recent Ukrainian and earlier Soviet refugees to an insulated sect of Russian Orthodox Christians called Old Believers, or starovery, these varied stories are steeped in religion, war, family, geography, art, and work. How they tell these stories, and whether they tell them at all, has been steeped in their sense of who Aleks, the person they're talking with, might be. And it turns out that Aleks is not only a curious and patient listener, he's also full of stories and reflections that do a great deal to get us thinking about moving between countries and languages as we try, day by day and year by year, to be at home where we are. This conversation with Aleks happened in late August 2025 in the X-Ray FM studio in North Portland. It's worth noting that this conversation took place not in Russian, but in English, and this is what we started with. What it feels like for Aleks to engage in this and so many other conversations in English, in a country that was not, but is becoming, his home. Well, thanks, Aleks, for joining us here in the basement at X-Ray. And I guess I wanted to start by asking you, since we're going to be talking a good bit about Russian-speaking communities in Oregon, I wanted to start by asking what it feels like to start a conversation or an interview in English.
At first, thanks for having me. I mean, it's always horrifying to speak in the other language other than your native one. Because, at first when I came here and I had to, speak English, it was like a kind of horror grows up in me. And, I try to, to avoid it, like with any, possible reasons that I could come up with. And it is, troubling for me to speak English, because when I came here, to Oregon, I had this project of researching Russian-speaking communities, and I thought that's not a big deal. I would be dealing just with the Russian-speaking people, and I don't need like a lot of English. I have some, but actually, there was a lot of coincidence, because when I came here, I felt a little bit like I felt kind of mute, because it was when the war started
in 2022.
Yeah, in 2022, and it was like the day I came here, the war started, and it was like a pretty nasty coincidence. And like nobody wanted to speak Russian. I guess even me don't want to speak Russian, because I was confused what is happening and how long it will be. So I realized that I need to speak English, unless I'm going to be mute for a long time, because I want to share my thoughts and I want to share my feelings and emotions. And I want to speak and to communicate with people who's around me. That's why, I need more English. And that's how I realized we'll actually think different. How Russian speaking people, think much longer sentences, like Dostoevsky did.
Uh-huh.
And how like local people, like Americans do. It's much shorter and it's like a metaphorical and like idiomatic language, which I like a lot. And actually, I grew a lot of love to it. I mean, this idiomatic piece of it.
Well, can I ask you? You said you didn't want to speak Russian, and other people also didn't want to speak Russian. Why not? I understand that the war started, but can you say more about why you didn't want to speak Russian?
Yeah, actually, I remember this exact day when I heard it for the first time. It was like, it was March 5th of 2022. And the person who I was speaking to, starts with it like a good day, like a dobry den in Russian. And he said to me, it couldn't be a good day because, bombs are falling. And if it is a good day for you and me, it is definitely not a good day for people who are dying in Ukraine. And then I realized it's kind of tricky. I mean, even in personal conversation to use Russian. So I started to write in English on my social media, and a lot of my friends started to do the same thing. They just start to write in English, even like it was just a casual posts.
Without explaining why? Or people just made the change and it was understood? That's pretty radical change.
Yeah, as for me, I was started to do it without explaining, because if you are start to explain that, you actually, prohibit some Russian laws from that time, because when the war started, you just cannot say it is a war. There is actually a small reason why I started to use Russian, because, so many words, they start to feel and seem so, different, and they just got like a different context. And even words from, our beloved and favorite Russian, writers like Dostoevsky and Pushkin or something like that. There was like a special campaign in Russia, whose side will be like Pushkin and Dostoevsky if they will live in our time. And I mean, the goal of this campaign was to make sure that people understand that Pushkin and Dostoevsky will be on the Putin's side. I mean, they even found the proofs of
They did
that.
some careful literary reading. Or where?
Yeah, they just, they just select some places about like a Russian spirit and how Russians should feel themselves. So it's like, it was totally, wicked thing. So for me, it was pretty hard to speak Russian and write in Russian, that because you will need like a ton of pages to explain why. It's, it would be easier just to cut it off.
So you came here in 2022 knowing that you were going to research Russian-speaking communities in Oregon.
Yeah.
And then you realized you were not comfortable speaking Russian, and that possibly many of the people you were going to be speaking with were also not comfortable speaking in Russian. Is that an accurate characterization of what happened 3 years ago?
Yeah, it sounds like kind of absurd thing, because, before that, I mean, Russian-speaking communities here, they're not all Russians. I mean, I would say maybe 60% of them are not Russians. They are even not Slavic. I mean, because there is some, business about that. How should we call them? Because after the war, they call them like a Russian-speaking communities. It's not correct, because some of them actually use 3 or 4 languages at home, like, for example, Ukrainian or Kyrgyz or something like that. but they do use Russian because it's easier, and it's because most of them were from Eastern European countries like Romania or Poland, and they have to learn Russian in their schools. So it was also the colonial thing. And here it would be easier, to use Russian language in the communication. And when, people here ask you where are you from, and you start to explain what kind of part of this big, area are you, it's easier to say like, Russia or USSR before.
When you're explaining to folks that,
where you're from. And
like if you were explaining to someone like me.
Yeah.
But what if it was to someone from Romania? In other words, how much of the differences from your home countries carry over right away at the start here?
So when I met a person from Romania or Slovenia or, I don't know, Serbia, we actually could find a common ground to speak on. To find the common topics to speak and maybe to have something in common. A lot of Eastern European immigration, they're not religious. Yeah, they share like the same post-Soviet, sets of values and how they feel about everything in America. So I guess it's easier to find, common language with them using Russian. But, there was a big religious immigration who started to came here, I think, from 1960s. Old believers like starovery in Woodburn. And after that, started from 90s, I guess, you get a lot of Christian, like Protestants, Adventist, Baptist, Pentecostals, and they form like a vast number of small communities. Here we have like a layered cake with any kind of different Christian-centered cultures, and they have their own, not a dialect, but their own version of Russian language. That's why I was interested in the first place.
Which is what I was just going to ask you about. So can we go back to 2022 before you came over? Your plan was to come from where and why here to study this?
Yeah, actually, I had this idea for a long time. The first time I came to Portland, it was in 2000, I guess. And I came here as a student and I worked on the construction set. And I noticed that there's a lot of people who speak Russian, but their own language. And for me, it was like a funny story or just interesting, observation. And then, I went back to Russia and, started to live my life.
Where in Russia?
I lived in St. Petersburg and in Moscow for a long time, almost all my life. And I always have this, idea that far, far away, like 11 hours from our time in Moscow, there is a lot of people who speak a lot of version of Russian language. And for me, it felt like journey on a time machine, because when you hear them talking, you can see people who speak to you from 70s, 80s, 90s, and it did not change, because when they want to use like a contemporary term, they just don't know it and they use an English one, but they usually adopted. I mean, they add some, Russian prefixes and suffixes to make it feel Russian. Yeah, and that's why I got this idea. I need to dig deeper into these communities.
So that as people left Russia and came here, their language was frozen in the era that they had left.
Yeah. And usually when we're, speaking about the Russian religious communities, they usually actually came here by whole villages, and they usually not educated, high educated. They even have a high school diplomas sometimes. So they know nothing about any versions other their own. And they usually don't want to communicate to others. I mean, even other Russian-speaking communities.
Outside their group.
Yeah.
You're listening to The Detour with Aleksander Chernousov. What's your sense of what was driving these mostly religious groups in the 60s and 70s and coming up to today? What was driving these groups to come here to Oregon, of all places?
It's interesting because I have a lot of version of that. I will start from conspiracy.
Good. Maybe we can always start and finish with conspiracy.
Oh yeah, because if you talk about the religious groups, there should be some conspiracies. The first one, it's that Republicans, they always think about this part of country as a democratic states. I mean, all this California, Washington, and Oregon. And after the charismatic church started to help Republicans to seize some more power from 60s, from 1960s, they started to think how they can, dissolve this democratic population with something more Republican. So in 1980s, during Reagan administration, there was a lot of moves that help to get more people from Ukraine, from fallen apart USSR. Mm-hmm. There was, I guess, several acts or laws written between Gorbachev and Reagan
to have people come over.
Yeah, that make it easier, and they have a Christian charismatic lobby in the immigration department. I don't know how it was called in that time, and they have a lot of sponsors in the All Believers community, and then in charismatic church, and people just started to come here. And when they came here, they, in maybe a couple years, they could be sponsored themselves. Mm-hmm. So it grows exponentially. And they usually had great benefits. I mean, social service benefits. And then they started a lot of businesses, like the logistics, landscaping, building, car repairs, something like that. I mean, where you need just skills, not education. So their businesses started to grow very fast. So it was like conspiracy one.
Well, that explanation starts a little bit conspiratorial because the explanations seem to be more from the perspective of our political parties than from the perspective of the people themselves doing the moving.
Yeah. Then we came to the, to the second one. I would call it like a word of mouth, because a lot of Russian religious communities, they have connections with like different communities, and they said you guys have to go there because it has a climate that actually it's like Russian climate, and actually it is like this because I feel this way too. Because every time when I visit Central Oregon, I felt like actually home. It's pretty interesting, but still it is.
So this is a very sort of interesting explanation of how we end up in Oregon and Washington with different communities of, I guess, Russian-speaking groups, some of whom communicate more internally than with each other. Would you say today, in 2025, are there still relatively self-sufficient groups of old believers, for example, or other religious communities or geographical communities that are dense around Portland or other parts of Oregon?
No, golden times are past, you know. There was actually the third thing about, the third reason, the third theory why they all came here, because it's specifically reserved for charismatic churches, because a lot of them, a lot of church members actually had prophecies about the United States, and it was widely spread, and they were told in their prophecies that you have to go to godless country with a lot of churches. And the only option for that is United States, because there's a lot of churches, of any kind of churches, but from their point of view, there are no God in those churches. They don't have their God in those churches. So that's why they believe that United States is like the best opportunity.
But today, as you said, the golden days are gone.
Yeah.
Can you say more about what you mean by that?
I guess it started in 2010s, maybe 2015s, and it is because of all of laws and regulations about the rights of gay rights, of minorities, of transgender rights, because most of those communities, they kind of fundamentalists, but because they're closed communities, they don't want to, to make a conversation how they feel and how should we approach to any kind of problem. So they just want to leave this place, and they actually, some of them, maybe at least 30%, I guess, they left Oregon already to North Carolina, to Florida, somewhere, where they feel more welcomed.
More politically aligned.
Yeah.
And also there are a lot of churches.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So in a funny way, your first explanation, the conspiratorial explanation, didn't work. That is, the Republican-driven effort to bring more religious communities from Russian-speaking places to Oregon to shift the political calculus. Actually, what happened was, with at least some of those religious communities, Oregon's political culture was too far left. So they have departed for the Southeast or other places.
Yeah, it's actually pretty interesting, because I think There was a couple of reasons why it didn't work. First one, because not long after that, I guess maybe in 2000, there was a lot of, power games inside the charismatic churches because they tried to grasp like more power to themselves. So the churches started to divide, and some of them actually um accept some the liberal freedoms of United States, because there's a lot of people who feel the same way, but they want more freedom for themselves. But uh, they still have this fundamental look, but they decided to stay away from the government as as far as they can, because I guess in 2014 or 16 they actually try to participate in political life. They try to run for you know for city councils or something like that, but they couldn't get into it. So that's how they realized that maybe they're not welcomed. So they decided to stay, closed. It was a chance, but it just didn't work. I mean, maybe it wasn't a good time for it.
Yeah. And you've developed your understanding of these waves of immigration and the reasons for them. How have you developed such a deep historical understanding of what's been going on here?
I'm kind of adept of like just talking to people. And when I first came here, it it felt and seemed like an unrealistic task. So I just started to talk to people how they feel. Uh, it was actually really hard to find a way to speak to religious one, especially who came from distant cities and villages, not from St. Petersburg or Moscow, something like that. A lot of Ukrainian people, they still are not ready to talk.
Are they not ready to talk, or were they not ready to talk to you because they read you as different? What made it so difficult?
They are not ready to talk to me because the only language we could speak is, Russian. I don't speak Ukrainian, unfortunately. And most of them don't speak English. And the best answer I get when I asked for an interview, and the person said that I really want to talk and share my story, but let's wait when the war ends. So we are still waiting for that. So yeah, mostly by talking, but I'm still a courtesy researcher at University of Oregon, and they had a lot of history working on that problem. They have a couple persons who worked on the same topic from different angle. There was Tamara Morris, who worked with All Believers community, and there was a professor, Tatiana Osipovich, who worked with the All Believers community too, and she actually do this conversational stuff too. They actually gathered a lot of oral histories from All Believers, and it was very helpful. But yeah, I just came to church and just started to talk to people and asked them if they could talk to me. And, I showed them what kind of topics I want to talk to them. And some of them said yes, because, there's like the only opportunity to talk with someone sometimes.
About where they're from and why they made the trip, or to talk with someone, period?
Yeah, to talk to someone about their immigration experience, because, when you're immigrant and you came here, it's like nobody want to hear your story because you can talk to immigrants, but they all have their own stories to share. And it's not like the same, but they all have pretty complicated histories by themselves. So it's really hard to find a person who really wants to hear you out.
And you have been that person, the person who will hear them out?
Yeah.
How do you do it? How do you let them know you're going to hear them out? You talked before about logistics being one of the areas that immigrants from Russian-speaking communities work. What are the logistics of getting people talking about their experience as immigrants?
There was actually two steps that I made actually intuitively, more about that. So I managed to have a talk on Russian speaking Christian radio where I said that I'm, happy to talk to people, and there was some pastors who are eager to talk to me, and share their contacts, share my contacts with people who are, want to talk. And there was a lot of information from that. I mean, information, there was a half of stories, but there was, some reactions like we could tell our stories only to God, something like that. But still, it is a good response for me too, because, it just tells as much as story tells. But also it was maybe a week after the Dobry Den situation, I started to think how I could, make people talk, because I was a person who came from Moscow during the war. Yeah, it was hard to make people talk to a person like that. So I decided to make some kind of community, more like theatrical community, because mostly people love theater. I mean, people who are not religious, of course, they love theater. And I made it like an open call for Russian-speaking immigrants through the radio, through the internet, trying to gather group of people who are eager to learn more about their own communities by means of film and theater. I told them that I'll ask them how to act, how to talk, how to write like a personal story or memoir, and I did. And after they understand how to tell their own stories, I suggested them to tell other people's stories who cannot tell their own stories. So it was like a massive search. I mean, it was like a 14 people, and they started to speak to their, acquaintances, to their relatives, to gather stories about immigrant experience. And it was that scope of work that I would never able to do, because it was, I guess, 300 people. They talked during a month, and they shared their stories, and we reflected on them. And after we had enough of stories, we decided to make a performance out of it, because film is too expensive. Theater it's much cheaper, so that's why we decided to make a performance out of that. And it wasn't just Russian speaking communities there. There was a lot of different immigrants there, even from Iran or Afghanistan, because they speak Russian too. And also Belarus, Ukraine, Romania. There's a lot of people from Romania who speaks Russian too. So we had that performance about immigrants' experiences, and it was I guess it was a big thing that I did. And after that, I just think that, okay, my job is done. I'm going home, but the war is still going on. And I realized that I cannot go back home because I got a draft notice waiting for me. I don't know why, because I never was in the army. I never do like something like military stuff. So university just they suggest me to continue my project there, and of course I said yes, yes. So after that, I decided that I continue my research in Russian-speaking communities because they have a absolutely interesting dynamics, how they act here and how they feel here and how they develop or evolve, and how they move in terms of uh, language, geography, sociology. But I decided to focus more on religious communities because, frankly, non-religious communities here in Oregon are not big. I mean, maybe five, maybe 10,000 people, but maybe 100,000 more a religious one.
You're listening to The Detour with Aleksander Chernousov. Can I go back to what you said about you were prepared to go home, but for the draft notice, which made me think back to what you said about the difficulty of speaking Russian once the war started, which felt more like an ethical challenge. But the reason it sounds like you didn't go home was more of a practical challenge. So I want to ask you about going back, and were you ready to go back and speak Russian all the time if there were no draft notice? Were you ready for that transition back?
Yeah, the main reason why I was going back because my family was there. So yes, it was a practical one because I actually haven't seen them for 7 months by that time. So I was eager to see them. But when I was planning to going back, I started to talk to people who was still there. I mean, my friends, my colleagues in theater and the films. And I started to realize how everything was changed, how people talk, how they feel, because people still live in Russia. I mean, some of them got used to it, how it's all happening, because some of them left Russia because of, their life changed. I mean, in small ways, like your Apple Wallet doesn't work. I mean, that frustrates you and you want to leave your country. That's okay. I mean, some of them left Russia because of that.
Okay.
I mean, not because of, specifically Apple Wallet, but little things like that. A lot of people actually left Russia because it is really strange to live in a situation where you can, name things for what they are. Uh, and you actually can't understand who are your friends are anymore, because it was one of biggest surprises and frustrations, how many people turn into, you know, people who wanted blood. I mean, because I knew them as really nice, intelligent people who work in, film and who supposed to deliver, all kind of great ideas or maybe work on like entertainment stuff. But after this big shift in 2022, they, they started to talk about death, revenge, blood or something like that. And because I've read it on Facebook or Instagram, I was confused because I was thinking maybe this is the way how people, trying to protect their, positions or their families. So like a couple months before my planned coming back to Russia, I started to, to call them like personally by phone or Zoom. And I realized that, that they mean it. That they've changed. Not that they've changed, but that they always had it in themselves. And I was a bit, scared about that because I was thinking, what if I was there? If I had to, to protect my family, or what I would say, how would I act?
Mm.
So I was afraid for, how I would act. And, people are human beings, they're weak. And so I just understand that I cannot go back because it's it is not like a challenge, but it's kind of it's like Russia I left is doesn't exist anymore. Uh, Not because it doesn't have Apple Wallet, but because people speak different language now. And now I became that, encapsulated person who speak Russian language of 2022 version. And that is that because I realized that uh, they had a new word, carpet, and they use it like, I can use like a GPS because of carpet. And carpet, it's like a name of the like military action when drones are coming, they just switch off internet everywhere like a carpet, like they just roll out carpet. And I realize I don't want to go to the place with the carpets.
And once you realized that, you found a way to bring your family over here?
Yeah, it was a challenge too because it took year and a half, I guess, to bring them here. Yeah, but still we managed to do it.
So now not just you, but at least part of your family, your immediate family, is here where in Oregon are you?
In Beaverton.
In Beaverton. You've written 2 pieces for Oregon Humanities. One is called Speaking in Tongues, and one is called One of Them. And you talk about being an immigrant and wondering what is an immigrant and whether that is what you are. Can I ask, like, how does it feel more than 3 years later? And we haven't yet talked about this country's changes. We've been focused more on the country you came from. But what does it feel like? Do you feel like you are an immigrant? How do you understand yourself in a category at this point?
Being immigrant is like It means you cannot share the same nursery rhymes with the people who are you speaking to in the moment. I mean, you just cannot understand each other. Or for example, it's like in Russia we have special room at the entrance where you leave your dirty shoes. And it's like it means a lot for a Slavic mind to have that kind of room where you can just leave your dirty shoes. But it's cleaner here. So somewhere you don't need, that kind of room. You could use this room for something, else. So being immigrant for me, it's something like this. It's like you're missing some part of life which is around you, and sometimes you just didn't even realize what kind of a part of life you're missing. Maybe in a year or two or a couple years, or maybe more, you realize that, oh, I should have done that, or maybe that. And I would knew it, if I was born here, or at least raised here, not born. This, this part is like that bugs me like in everyday life, but there is a territory of like dreams. It's like how you feel yourself from like maybe eternal perspective, because you don't have a place where you can go to see places where your relatives was buried. And I didn't realize that it is hard, just don't have that kind of place. And you realize that you would be the first relative who's going to be buried in this land for your children. It's kind of pressure. So yeah, and if you talk about the most practical and hard thing for immigrant, it's like get connections, and not just connections. I mean, if you get friends, you will be lucky. Even in Russia, it's not like you're making friends everywhere you go or every day. But here it's more difficult because you just have a specific, number of people who is living here, and maybe you don't like that kind of people, or maybe you are not like that religious, or maybe you're not like bowling or something like that. There's a pretty weird things why people became friends.
Sure. Bowling, for example.
Yeah. So yeah, it's I think it's mostly this sense of belonging.
You said this land for your children. Does this feel like that's how you think about Oregon or the United States now, where it is the land where you will be buried and perhaps your children will be buried?
My stepdaughter, when we have troubles here and starting to discuss, a possibility to move back to Russia, she always tells us like, never. I don't want to go anywhere. I like it here. Uh, so yeah, I feel that it's like, I mean, I guess every immigrant has this thought that it's not for me, it is for my children. But I always want to say that because I have this quote which I like. It's from Dr. Seuss. So I like it to be here, and I like it a lot. Send the cat in the hat to the fish in the pot. So I like it to be here, and I guess there's a lot of things for me in here in Oregon, and I feel connected to some places here. I feel like already I knew them already. I mean, how it's supposed to feel, and in terms of climate or just how it looks. Sometimes it's like I recognize some places. It's deep in your heart vision or something like that. So yeah, that for the first place, it's like the land for my children, but I feel like I'm pretty comfortable here too.
Did you first read Dr. Seuss's The Cat in the Hat in English or in translation? How did you encounter and when did you encounter that book?
Uh, I started, I started two books. There's like a Russian version of Dr. Seuss. It's Kornei Tchaikovsky. It was my favorite book. I mean, and all those weird things, I mean, that I have in my mind is thanks to Kornei Tchaikovsky. So I just tried to find a like analogous book here like that. Like, so I found The Cat in the Hat. Uh, and I started to read to my 1 year child this two books like simultaneously, Tchaikovsky and Cat in a Hat.
So, first of all, I feel like you've talked about a lot, both about Russian speaking communities in Oregon and about your own experience and thinking about moving to Oregon. And I feel like we're moving toward closing a conversation, even though there's so much more that what you've said has opened up. But I want to ask you about whether you feel like these days, over 3 years in, are you feeling a persistent question in your head about yourself living here? A question that keeps coming up?
There is like a simple question that always comes up. It sounds like what's next, because there is always something new, like every day something new. Because for example, I'm working at the University of Oregon, and specifically in Russian department, like a Russian Eastern European department. And I got information that they are shutting it down starting the next year, because it's like few majors and like low enrollment. So like not a lot of people who are interested in understanding on speaking or learning Russian. So yeah, it's gonna be definitely next chapter. And so maybe it's like a part of being immigrant, because like every day something new comes up. Uh, Sometimes it's something nice, but most of the time it's something you just have to do.
Hmm.
So I wish that I will have something about, my development or my like internal journey of how I make my life, or how my perspective is changing. It is changing, because even if I would met myself from 2022, I have a lot to tell that person how I should do things. But when you're immigrant, this like everyday tasks, they just devour all your time and strength, and it makes you start not from the zero, but from the like minus point.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why, yeah, it's like, what next?
Mm. Well, to what next? Uh, I guess I want to say first, I hope we'll keep talking about next possibilities. I also just want to say an enormous thank you. I'm so glad you're here in all the ways here suggests. Uh, I've gotten to know you through some work that Oregon Humanities does with Humanity in Perspective and through your writing. And it's been an incredible pleasure and a gift. And I know many other people that have said that, and I hope you're aware of that. I hope it's not too awkward for me to say that while we have microphones in front of us. I think I want to just close the conversation by asking you if there's anything else you feel like you want to say here as we get to the end of this detour.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I mean, all the things that we done with the Oregon Humanities, that was, really appreciated. It was a gift. And I would say about the writing, actually, because for me, I always liked to write. Actually, when I was like a 6, and I was run out of books because there was not like a lot of books in USSR for children. I decided to write my own and read it. It wasn't, successful because, I read faster than I write. So yeah, thanks for the possibility to contribute my writings, because I realized that for me, it's like a big output of my reflection and feelings. And it is also some kind of laboratory for me where I could apply or all my knowledge and reflection and make something out of it. I really appreciate this possibility to write, because for me to write, it's not to be mute.
I think I want to leave it there and say thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Adam.
Aleksander Chernousov is a theater director and storyteller living in Oregon. He's currently serving as a courtesy researcher in the Russian, East European, and Eurasian Studies Department at the University of Oregon, and he has contributed writing to Oregon Humanities magazine and helped teach our Humanity in Perspective course. You can learn more about Aleks in our show notes at oregonhumanities.org. Thanks for listening to The Detour from Oregon Humanities. Anna McLean is our producer, and Alexander Sylvester, Karina Brisky, and Ben Waterhouse are our assistant producers. This is Adam Davis. See you next time.